So if you saw McFarland USA, if you've ever seen that movie,
Yes,
it is a
great,
absolutely fabulous movie, but the story after the movie is even better than the movie. So I want to introduce to you my great friend that I call Diaz, but his name is Damacio Diaz. So you can see why I just call him Diaz. Okay? And he's a great friend of mine, but I want to bring his wife up, Courtney, also. Courtney, I just want people to see you. Okay? Yeah, so this is Courtney. I didn't want to embarrass you, Courtney, but the reason I wanted to do that is because you don't know what the wives go through in this stuff. And I'm telling you, they are as brave and as powerful as any women you will find. So thank you, Courtney. Appreciate
I
it.
couldn't do the solitary back.
Couldn't do that one.
Joe would have to go.
I would.
If it's okay, I'm going to move this a little bit to the center.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, everybody, hello. God bless you guys. It's our honor. It's our privilege to be here today. Pastor Brian has been such a good friend and role model for me. And so when he called a few months ago and he extended the invitation, it was not even a question for me. My wife and I were both on board. We are excited to be here. We're excited to meet you guys. Yesterday we had a fabulous meal at Janet's home with Gary. And unexpectedly, I spoke. I didn't mean to. I wasn't expecting it. But, you know, God works in crazy ways, in mysterious ways. And so I think it was not a coincidence. There was a reason for that yesterday. And so we spoke yesterday and gave my testimony kind of, you know, for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And so today I'm going to extend it a little bit longer. I hope you don't mind. But I'm going to give you the full version of what God did in our lives over these past 8 or 9 years. So here we go. So I am one of 7 children. My name is Damacio Diaz. My friends call me D because nobody can say Damacio. I have 6 brothers and 1 sister. We're all a year apart. Our parents are amazing, God-fearing, God-loving parents. But we were very poor. We were born and raised in a very small town. No stoplights, no McDonald's, just a bunch of hard-working people. Our parents were field workers their whole lives. Knew nothing else but working in the fields, following the crops. That's how they earned their money, and that's how they fed us. My dad was very respected. My dad is a good man, a wise person, and he gained the respect and trust from a lot of the farmers in our area. And my dad was selected to be foreman of the crews or different supervising positions, and that was great. But it was horrible for us as kids, because at the age of 8 years old, all of us in my family began working in the fields. It was normal. It was a standard operating procedure for us to work in the fields, picking fruit, picking vegetables, pruning trees and vines, and hoeing and cleaning and everything else. We worked every single day of our life, except Sunday. We worked every summer, every winter break, every Thanksgiving, every spring. We didn't go on vacation. We didn't do anything except work in the fields. Where we live, it's very, very hot, or it's very, very cold. And when it's cold in the winter, there's a lot of fog. And our schools don't allow the buses to commute during fog, so they delayed the beginning of school till 10 a.m. That means that we had to go work in the fields. So every kid was asleep at home, except us. We were up at 5:30 or 5 in the morning, and in the field by 5:30 working. And so it was horrible. We hated it. But that's who we were. Mom and Dad instilled in us 3 basic principles that since we were babies, we grew up believing these principles. God first, always, no matter what. God first, then family, and then education. In that order, no budging. That's what it was. Mom only obtained a 3rd grade education. My mom has 14 siblings, and so her family followed the crops all throughout the western states. She didn't have an option. She quit school at 9 years old or 10 years old and worked the rest of her life. My father has 11 siblings. My dad's the oldest male in the family, And my grandfather abandoned the family when he was in 8th grade. So my dad quit school and became the man of the house. So working for them was a way of life. And my parents wanted more for us. They wanted us to not have that life, to break the cycle of poverty. My parents, especially my dad, really instilled in us that the way you break that cycle of poverty and remove yourself from having to work in this laborious condition was education. So all 7 of us, my family, obtained higher education, advanced degrees, and we all did well. My parents get all the credit for that. God first, my parents. And so now, all my brothers, some of us now own the same orchards and fields that we grew up working in. God has blessed our family in ways that we could not even ever repay. After college, I became a police officer. Being a police officer for me was a perfect job. I had always been that kind of a kid. And I wasn't a regular by-the-book kind of cop. I was not. I never had been. I never could be. From the academy on, I just had this draw, this attraction towards violence, danger. I never worked a day shift in my career, 20-something years, never worked a day shift. I enjoyed the nighttime. I never worked a nice neighborhood either. I always was selected to work the horrific parts of the city in Bakersfield, the poverty-stricken, crime-stricken neighborhoods. And I enjoyed it. I loved it. That's what I did. After a few years of being a police officer, you begin to, I lost my empathy. I lost my compassion. I lost the sympathy that I was raised with, the love for people. I was very calloused, and I just didn't care anymore about people who were suffering. Families who were breaking and broken and just miserable. My job was my job, and I focused on that, and I did well. I had a lot of success early on in my career, promoted very quickly, made detective very quickly, and was assigned to specialized units my entire career as a detective. And so I was selected to work undercover after a few years as a detective, and was placed in a federal task force with DEA. My job was very simple. Get the bad guys, get the drug dealers, not just the street drug dealers. We focused on heavy-duty drug dealers because I'm Hispanic and I speak Spanish, and I didn't look like this. I looked a lot different when I was undercover. And so my job was to form and establish relationships, connections with drug informants and drug dealers. And so that's what I focused on, and that's what I did. And I began to make some very, very, very good connections, and was involved with some heavy-duty organizations. We targeted drug cartels from Mexico. We were assigned out of California, but we worked, the entire country. I traveled everywhere because I was a drug dealer, and I was buying and selling millions and millions of dollars worth of drugs. And some of these places that we hit, some of these drug dealers where we went to their homes, we found boxes and boxes and bags, sometimes even pallets of money, cash, unreported, unregistered. At first, I just watched others take money. I didn't do it. I wasn't a thief. I was a bad guy. I was a drug dealer, but I wasn't a thief. And that meant something to me in the beginning. But I'll be honest with you, one day I'm sitting in my car with one of my main informants, and he handed me a wad of money. I knew it was drug money. I knew it was dirty money, but I took it. He gifted it to me. He told me it was a gift, and I accepted it, and I took it. That's how quickly it was. That's how fast and how simple the devil hooked you. For me, it was very quick. I didn't even think about it. I justified it in my mind by saying, I'm not the typical cop. I'm not the normal cop who's out there, going to people's homes, helping people, writing tickets, in an office, writing reports. I'm in the middle of hell. I am in this dark world where people are dying and suffering. The violence and the torture is a daily occurrence, and I'm in the middle of it. I'm pretending to be a bad guy, and I'm involved in things that are horrific. So I justified it, and I said, I deserve it. I could die any day. My wife had no idea of what my role was, what I did. She knew I was a dope cop. She knew that I worked in a narcotics assignment, but she had no idea as to the level of how far I had fallen and what I was doing. I was an expert liar. I grew to learn and know how to lie in ways that there was no doubt. If I met you and you met me and I told you something, you believed it, because the devil had completely taken over my life. I was a bad guy. And I'm not going to go into specifics because there's no reason. You can imagine how bad it was. Families were destroyed. People were lost their lives. People disappeared. My own friends, some of my informants were tortured and murdered in front of me. And I'm an undercover cop. And a lot of this stuff we are not reporting. No one knows. We are working off the books in areas we shouldn't be at, without the authorization from the government, without the approval of our superiors. I bought into the ends justify the means. Whatever it takes. My objective is to accomplish this task. Get this big-time fish and take as much money from him as I could. Because that's what the U.S. government wanted, was the cash. And unfortunately, I got good at that. We were taking so much money, it was ridiculous. Money that was unreported, cash. And the government was using that money to support and promote these black ops that we do in other countries. But it's all done through seized currency, seized money, taken by guys like me that never get reported. No one ever finds out. You'll never see a document or a media story or a report of some of these warehouses full of money that we found, because that money is used in different places and the American public never finds out. So one day I get informed that the FBI is now investigating me. The FBI has been watching and investigating me for about a year, and they have me. They have a cold case done. There's so much evidence against my behavior, my actions, not only where I live, but all my travels. So the FBI is going to indict me. They're going to arrest me. I heard it from my superiors. I expected it. There was no avoiding it. It devastated me because I had always been led to believe, I believed that I was doing the job. I thought this was my job. My job was to do this, even though it's illegal, it's violation of our policy. But my bosses were aware. I was getting approval to travel everywhere and do these things, so I never ever expected that I would be arrested for it. I always was led to believe that if anybody discovers what we're doing, we'll take care of it. That's what we do. We're the U.S. government, right? At the same time that the FBI is investigating me for this undercover criminal behavior, Disney is making a movie about our family and our coach and our lifestyle. See, when I was a kid, my oldest brother David, he's a couple years older than me. He joined, when he was in middle school, in junior high, he joined the cross country and track team. And I adored him. I idolized him. My brother David is such a tough guy, and that's what I wanted to be, a tough guy. And so I followed in his footsteps, and I began running. And when I made it to high school, I always ran varsity. I never ran a underclassmen or frost-off or JV race. I was pretty good. I had a lot of success. And we were the first California state championship team in cross country. We were a bunch of poor kids. And when I'm telling you we were poor, we shared the same shoes. Danny and I were the same size. He ran JV or frost off. He ran his 3-mile race. And as soon as the race was over, he'd give me his shoes so I could run mine in the varsity race. We never had racing shoes or running shoes, or we got whatever we got from the Salvation Army or from Kmart back then. We were just poor kids, but we had been running all of our lives. After school, we had to go to work. And sometimes the fields were 4 or 5 miles away, or 3 or 6, it depended. But my mom, our school bell ended or rang at 2:55. You had 20 minutes to get there. My mom expected you. So we ran 3 miles from school to the fields to work until 5:30 in the evening. Running to work, from work to school, back home was normal. We were runners, and so when we began racing, man, we were pretty good. And we didn't know how to train. Our coach was a fantastic Christian man. He was a second father to us. He is still in our lives on a daily basis. We talk to him and see him very, very often. And he was a good athlete growing up, and he had a college scholarship in baseball, and he signed with the Angels to play baseball. So he was an athlete, but he had no idea how to coach a running team. But with God's help, he coached us, and we had a lot of success, and we received a lot of attention competing against these schools that had a lot more than we did. So Disney is making this film about our lifestyle and our upbringing and our races and our accomplishments. And the media is, they're just bringing us up. They're just lifting us up. We are all over the media as positive role models. We are being talked about on entertainment shows. We are going to these national shows and being interviewed. ESPN, Sports Center, we're being interviewed by everybody. Hollywood is giving us the Hollywood treatment. We're driving in limousines and extended SUVs, and we're meeting these actors and actresses. Kevin Costner was fantastic to our family. He was such a good man and such a friend to our coach and our family. He invited me and Courtney and our brothers to his home. We had a nice barbecue at his house. He played catch with our kids, and he was just great. Disney was great to us. The FBI knew. They watched me being lifted and put on this pedestal by the media. And the FBI waited and waited for months until the movie came out. The movie was released, and exactly 1 week later, the FBI called this huge press conference, arrested me, and indicted me, and charged me with 16 federal counts. I was facing 27 years in prison for what I had done. It broke us. It broke me in a way that I had never experienced. I'd always been, I'm not an emotional guy. You'll never see me cry. Maybe you might today, I don't know. But I'm not that kind of kid. I'm not that kind of guy. I wasn't a guy who broke or became emotional. That just wasn't who I am, who I was. But facing 27 years in prison with a young wife and 3 kids, it scared me. I had been involved in some very tragic, scary incidents in my job. I was never afraid. I did things alone. I traveled to places by myself with drug dealers and drug informants, and we were involved in things that were, rated R times 1,000. It was ugly. That didn't scare me. I just didn't have that fear of, people and violence. This scared me. It scared me to a point where, she and I, we began to really, really have concerns about our future, about our marriage, about our children, about my parents. The FBI was relentless in their pursuit and their persecution of me. Some of my own friends, guys that I worked with in the task force, had turned against me in ways that was unbelievable. I was being targeted. I was being threatened. I was receiving death threats from my own friends and co-workers and partners. We were scared. We were concerned about our safety, our kids. The FBI went to my parents' home. My dad and my mom are very elderly in their 80s, and the FBI threatened them. And anyway, I began to fear that my life that I would not survive this. How can an ex-cop who targeted Mexican drug cartels make it in prison. It was very hard for me. I was angry. I was angry at God. I was angry at the government. I was angry at the people that I worked with that had turned on me. That's the way I felt. I know I'm being selfish. I know I was being very egotistical and self-absorbed, but I couldn't believe that my own unit was turning on me. The only person the FBI was pursuing was me. And I felt, I'm just a regular guy. I'm the guy that was in the front lines, but I'm not the boss. I have numerous bosses that go all the way, high up. So I kept thinking, somebody's going to take care of me. They have to. How could they not? That never came. The FBI never was interested in pursuing anybody above me. And then, of course, the media, you can imagine, the media likes to destroy people, but more so those that they see as hypocrites. That was me. I was a guy who was talking on these news interviews about how good it was to overcome this childhood tragedy and this poverty that we went through, and how running had helped us, overcome and achieve and get educated, and that we were now talking to young kids about overcoming the obstacles that you don't have any control of. See, we learned early on that you can't control certain things. You can't control that your parents are divorced or miserable. You can't control that you're poor, or that you belong to you live in a poor community, or you don't have the proper uniforms or equipment. Those things you can't control. You can control your attitude, how you see things, what you do. Those are the kind of things that we talk to kids about. And now the media saw me as a hypocrite, as a guy who was a dirty cop, a corrupt cop, who was doing all these things. So the media really, really, really targeted me and her. She was blamed a lot. She had no idea. And I'm not coming for her. I would tell you the truth. I'm not here to lie to anybody. Courtney did not know what I was doing. She didn't know the extent of the things that I was involved in. But the media didn't care. And so I was going through a tough time. I was angry at God. I'd been raised in church. I want you to know, I was raised in church. My grandfather had been a pastor for 60 years. My father was an associate pastor and an elder. My brother now is a pastor of I think the fastest growing church in California. So I knew I was raised as a Christian. But I wasn't a true Christian. I didn't have that connection, that intimate, personal relationship with God. I knew who God was. I didn't really have to trust Him or have faith because, my parents took care of all that. So I didn't really understand, and I didn't comprehend. And now I'm facing a lifetime in prison, and I'm angry. Because if it was true that God is who He is, He could have helped me. He could have prevented this. He could have protected me. And that's how naive I was, and how angry I was. So I get indicted, I get arrested, the government takes everything. One of my partners calls me and wants to meet with me, and he tells me, prison's going to be brutal. You're going to a federal prison, and you're facing a lifetime. It's not worth it. If I was in your shoes, I'd kill myself. You should kill yourself, because you're not gonna make it. You're gonna be targeted by every single group in prison, and you're a tough guy, but you're a small guy. You're not gonna make it. If I was you, I'd kill myself. I had never even considered that, but now there it was. The devil had planted that seed in my mind. If I'm dead, my wife has some support. She has a life insurance policy. So my kids might have a future. But being or belonging to a broken home, having a dad in prison, in our hometown there's nothing there. My kids were in jeopardy. They were at risk. So I thought about it. I considered it. And then I met with this guy. When he was 19 years old, he had committed a murder. He was in a gang. And he used an axe on another gang member. And he was caught and convicted. And he went to prison. While in prison, he continued that prison gang lifestyle and committed 2 more murders in prison. So he spent over 25 years in prison. He was released on parole weeks before I was to begin my sentence. And he reached out to me. And he was older now and not as, scary to look at. And he reached out to me and said he wanted to talk to me and meet with me. I was reluctant at first because I didn't know what his agenda was. Is he going to take me out before I go to prison? But I met with him anyway. And he told me that I wanted to prepare you. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be tough. You're facing a long sentence. You need to learn how to not think about the years. Don't even consider the years or the months or even the weeks. Only think about today. Survive today. When you wake up tomorrow, you have one less day in your sentence. And that's what his message was to me. Think about today. Survive today. And guard yourself because it's going to be hard. So, man, I'm devastated. I'm scared. I'm broken. I'm not going to make it. And then a couple days before my sentencing hearing, my dad and I are walking in my dad's orchard. My dad was a field worker growing up. All of his life. God blessed him later in life. And this farmer helped my dad buy his first plot of field, his first 20 acres. No money. This farmer financed it. Off the books, no banks. And my dad had a piece of land. And my dad became a farmer and grew his own crop and then began to expand and started a company. And God blessed him in ways that we couldn't even imagine. My dad is now an old man. And he and I are walking in his orchard. And my dad had an accident a few years earlier and he broke his leg in 17 areas. So he walks with a limp now, like this. So we're walking really slow. And he wants to talk to me. And we face each other. He holds my hands. And he tells me, God is going to use this trial to change your heart. The storm that was sent to break you is going to be the storm that God uses to remake you. The storm that was sent to break you, that meant that somebody sent the storm. It wasn't the FBI. It was my dad. We respect my dad. He speaks in a way that you listen. He's not one of those guys like me who can talk a lot. When he speaks, you listen because he says words or things that are just profound. Like your dad, Glenn, last night. And so my dad told me, the storm that was sent to break you is going to be the storm God uses to make you. That stuck in my head. But I couldn't accept it. The next 24 hours, 48 hours, it was in my head. I kept repeating and listening and thinking about what he said. But I didn't understand it. How and why would God want to use me? After I got arrested, over the next few months, there were over 100 stories in the media about me. Bad, ugly. If you go back and just look at Google me, whew, it's ugly. I'm portrayed as just, the worst of the worst. And they weren't wrong. I'm not saying they were wrong. They were right. But I was in a state of mind where I was just broken. And I'm thinking, my dad's a good dude, but why would my dad even believe that? God is not going to use me. There are some really good people out there that God can use. He's not going to use me. I'm a liar, I'm a cheater, I'm a crook, I'm a convict, I'm a felon. I didn't understand it. I was angry at God. But unbeknownst to me, God was working even when I didn't see it or expect it. We walked into the federal courthouse. My mom, my dad, my coach, my wife, my children, all of my brothers, all of their wives, all of our huge. It's like we're like a huge posse of Mexicans walking into the federal courthouse, and a couple of white people. My wife and my coach. We expected to hear the judge defame me, malign me, call me every name in the book, because I didn't have any trust in the system. I have been in the system. I've been part of it for a long time. My calloused perception of our U.S. justice system was corrupt. I believed that the person, the team that was able to tell the best lie won. Cops lied, victims lied, suspects lied, witnesses lied, defense attorneys definitely lied. Everybody lied. Everybody, they slated their story to fit whatever they wanted to, to provide to the jury. Judges I saw as just little mini gods who were presiding over this kingdom, and they were swayed by the lies. And I say that because I testified in court over 1,000 times. I have been, and I had been, in private conversations with numerous prosecutors at the state level and federal level, and the truth never mattered. How it really happened is not important. How you tell your story and what your truth is what mattered. It wasn't about the truth. And for 20-something years, I believed that it was okay to have your truth or your truth. And that was such a mistake. There is no such thing as your truth or your truth. It's the truth. That's it. And I didn't understand it because that was part of my job, to tell lies in a way that were believable. So going to my sentencing hearing, we were not expecting anything except the worst. A lot of praying, a lot of family time together, a lot of crying. And there I am, standing in front of a judge. My wife had spoken, my brother had spoken, our pastor, a bunch of people spoke on my behalf. And unbeknownst to me, this federal judge is a Christian man, a God-fearing man, and he rejects the government's case against me, and I plead out to 5 years. To me, that God had moved mountains right in front of me. I had seen and witnessed a miracle that we never expected. I did not expect to not live the rest of my life in prison, and maybe not even make it out of prison. But 5 years to us was a godsend and a miracle, and we were so ecstatic. And then this judge wrote me a letter when I was in prison. When do you ever hear of a judge taking the time to write me this beautiful, sweet letter? And so I began to see God in this. So I'm preparing for my sentence, 5 years. It was a lot better than 27 years. So I show up to prison on my first day, and I'm expecting the worst. I'm expecting to be attacked left and right. And it didn't happen. I was accepted. A group of people in prison, a bunch of inmates, took me in under the wing, and they began to provide things for me, food and things, and they took me in. So I began to feel very comfortable. Man, this is not bad. I'm working out. I'm eating okay. The prison food is horrible, but I'm eating. I'm not starving. I'm reading some books. I'm learning how to live the routine of prison life. And I began to think, I'm okay. I can handle this. It's not that bad. Not realizing that without God, my life was about to explode. And even though I began to feel that God was moving, I saw Him perform a miracle in my presence, I lost perspective. And I lost my focus. And I began to depend on myself and my social skills to connect with people in prison. And then on my 6th night in prison, my life exploded. The same people who took me in, who befriended me, who taught me how to survive in prison, attacked me in a way that was horrific. They tried to take me out. They discovered who I was, what I did, and what my focus was, primarily targeting Hispanic, Mexican drug cartels. And so they tried to take me out. I'm going to get a little bit graphic here, but I was showering at night. I was washing my hair. I was completely undressed in the water when I was attacked by 5 guys. I think 5 guys, maybe more, but 5 guys for sure. And unable to fight back. And I'm a fighter. I know how to fight. I'm not afraid to fight but I couldn't fight back. I couldn't even defend myself. And so it was a very, very brutal attack. I was saved by an angel who was at least 6'7", 400 and something pounds. This older black gentleman who walked in his boxer shorts and his prison sandals and no shirt. He's a big giant man. He walked into the shower where I was and he pushed the other guys away, grabbed my wrist, and he drugged me, bleeding, down the corridor, all the way to the guard's office. He banged on the guard's door and just left me there. I ended up waking up in the infirmary, and then I was placed in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement, if you understand what that means, it means you are completely alone. There are some places where they'll put 2 inmates in solitary cell, and that is a blessing that you don't understand. Because a guy like me, who had never been alone, who didn't like being alone, I had a huge family, a bunch of brothers, were very, very close, and then military and law enforcement, and always around people. And the kind of guy that I am, I like being in charge, I like being in control, I like knowing what the plan was, what the operation was. And here I was in a solitary cell that was all concrete, no windows, no outside stimulation, nothing. Just me and a metal bunk, a toilet, and a sink. A small little opening in the door where food is given to you. And I didn't understand why I was there. Why would I? I'm the victim. I was attacked. Why am I being punished by being placed in this place by myself? They wouldn't explain what I was doing there. Not one person ever took the time to tell me what the procedure was. I couldn't understand it, and I was going crazy, literally, for hours and days and nights that were dragging by. I sat there. That's all I did. No books, nothing. And my anger just got, more and more and more angry at God. Because I blamed God. I blamed everybody else too, but I didn't blame myself. I blamed God. Because I'd seen God work in other places. I'd seen God, in my family and my parents. And let me go back a little bit to 1939, how our life changed. Our family. We have a huge family. In 1939, my grandfather was in Mexico, and he was a Christian. He was a saved man, and he was preaching in these villages that they hated God and Christianity. My grandfather was beaten severely, hung from a tree, and left there to die at 22 years old for preaching the gospel. A Mormon missionary group that was traveling through that area on horse buggy found this man hanging from a tree. It was my grandfather. And he was unconscious. My grandfather spent 11 months in a coma. But God used him to bless our family in ways we have, several pastors in our home, in our family, numerous gifted people in our family, all because of one man, 100 years ago. So I knew the story in our family. I knew the historical part. I knew God was real, but I didn't know God. And I was angry at God because I was in this place by myself. So one day, I'm sitting on my metal bunk, and I'm angry, and I tell God in an audible voice, I'm telling you that I was talking to myself, I was talking to God, and I said, either you are God or you're not. If you are God, then show me why I'm here. What is the purpose to have me in this isolated hole by myself with no one to talk to, nothing to do? I'm driving myself crazy by talking to myself. So if you're God, if you're real, and if you say who you say you are, if you are who you say you are, show me. Tell me, explain to me, show me why I'm here. He didn't answer me. He didn't talk to me. I went to bed that day just as angry as I was when I woke up. But that night, I was awakened, startled, suddenly awakened by something. Could have been a noise, could have been anything, I don't know what it was. But I was awakened in the middle of the night. And when I woke up, I immediately felt, I sensed that there was someone in my cell with me. There was somebody in that cell. I couldn't see them. I was looking. It's a very tiny little cell. I couldn't see anybody, but I could feel it. And I'm telling you the truth. I could feel it in my heart, in my spirit, that there was somebody in that cell with me. Is this God? Is this how it works? I mean, is God in this cell with me, and is he trying to show me that he's here with me? I don't know. I tried to fall back asleep. I was laying there in bed trying to fall back asleep, and I couldn't. But I had my eyes closed, and I'm trying to sleep, and then I just sense in my spirit, I sense God telling me, be still and trust my plan. I am more than you think I am. I remembered that, and I began repeating it. Be still and trust my plan. I am more than you think I am. And I kept saying that over, I must have said it 100 times. And so I said, okay, I mean, I'm gonna stop worrying. If it's true that you are who you say you are, and now you're telling me to just stop and be still and trust, I don't know how I'm gonna trust, but I don't have any trust. I don't trust anybody, nobody. Trusting someone for me was very difficult. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to trust God. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try. In the morning when the officer brought me my breakfast, I asked him for a Bible. He said, no, you can't have a Bible in here. I've been there a long time. I need something to do. I need something to read. No, you're not permitted to have a Bible. But other guys have stuff. They have writing material. They have books. They have libraries. They have whatever. No, your case is different. You can't have a Bible. I beg him. He says, let me find out. I'll inquire. Later that night, he brings me an old, worn-out Bible. And I began to read it. I mean, I had read the Bible before. I was raised in church. I had heard the pastor and other people read. But it never, ever, ever made a difference to me. It never spoke to me. I didn't understand it. Oftentimes, when my parents made us read, it was perfect because I could take a nap. Because I would read and fall asleep. It didn't make any. It didn't attract my attention growing up. But now, for the first time in my life, the Bible was speaking to me. I was reading things that were making sense, and oh my God, I could picture the scenario and the environment, and I was understanding what the writer was trying to speak to me about. And it made a lot of sense to me. I began to tell myself, maybe this is the way it works. Maybe God is in control. Maybe God is going to use this for something. I don't know. The hardest obstacle for me to overcome was my faith. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't believe anybody. And having faith in something that I couldn't see, that I couldn't touch or feel, was very difficult. So having faith in God for me was going to be very difficult. I couldn't overcome that. It was a stumbling block. I couldn't just get over it. But I remembered what God had told me the night before, to be still and trust. Okay, God. So I began to read and read and read. And Isaiah 43:2 stood out to me a lot. Isaiah 43:2 says this: when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. That, it hit me hard. It was powerful. This was me. As I'm going through my trial, my storm, my struggle, God is going to be with me. That's what he says. So if I was to believe what the Bible says, then I need to believe that God is going to be with me. That was hard. And then I read the simple kid story of Noah and the ark. I had learned that story when I was 3 years old. I knew it. But as I read it this time, I saw in Genesis 7 that the Bible says, then God shut him in. That blew me away. It was God himself who had shut the doors of the ark to protect Noah from that flood. It was God who shut him in. And then when I read Jonah, the story of Jonah, and Jonah was running away from God. He was going in the exact opposite direction where God had sent him. He was on that ship, and he was thrown overboard. And then the Bible says God sent a huge fish who swallowed Jonah. This whale swallowed Jonah, and it was in the belly of the fish that Jonah prayed. Whew. That to me, this solitary cell was my Jonah, was my fish, and I was Jonah. I had prayed in this cell in ways that I had never, ever experienced. I didn't know God like that. God had begun to change my everything, my heart, my spirit, my mind, my perception. I wasn't one of those guys, like Joe maybe, who got saved, and from one second to the next, he was saved. Mine was a process. I had a lot of baggage to have to overcome because I knew the stories of the Bible, but I didn't really believe them. I didn't really trust God. I didn't really know God. Even though I might have known, had a little bit of knowledge, I didn't know God. So my salvation was a process. It wasn't just very quickly or very a quick situation. But man, I was a different man. Just from that moment, I began to see my situation in a different way. I began to see that God was in control. That God was specifically involved in my removal from that place where I was. And even though it might have been I wouldn't have chosen that path. I wouldn't have chosen to get, attacked the way I did. But that's what for a guy like me, who's very hard-headed and dumb, that's what it took. It took me being broken. It took me being separated completely from anything that would distract me from seeking God. No family, no wife, no friends, no partner, nothing. Nothing to distract from what I needed. I was that one guy that was just hard-headed. And I began to see that sometimes God will allow you to go through things because you need to discover and figure out for yourself that without God, you're in trouble. You will not make it. God is the only way, sometimes, oftentimes, all the time, to make it. And in my case, it took a long while for me to understand it, but I got it. I got it. Sometimes you have to be alone to finally figure out and accept that without God, you're in trouble. Okay. So I'm in solitary confinement. I have a Bible. I'm reading the Bible from morning to evening and over and over. And then on my 33rd day in prison, again, things get crazy. And so by then, I was all in. I was a soldier for God. I couldn't talk to anybody. There was nobody to talk to, but I knew that I was a born-again, redeemed man. I was going to do something with what God was teaching me and showing me. But on my 33rd day in prison, again, in the middle of the night, I'm awakened by a officer by himself. He handcuffs me and removes me from my cell. Now, if you know the policy and how prisons work, a prison guard will never, ever move an inmate by themselves. It's foolish and it's dangerous, and it's against their policy. But this officer, on his own, took me out of my cell, and he cuffed me in a dark hallway to the rail on the wall and left me there. I was undressed, I was barefoot, and he left me there by myself, cuffed to the wall. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't explain why he was doing this, and he left. The fear, oh my God, the fear that was in me because I felt like I was going to be killed or sexually assaulted or who knows what else. I mean, you can imagine your mind is just going crazy, right? Because this isn't normal. They cuffed me to the metal rail in the dark by myself at 3 or 4 in the morning. About 5 or 10 minutes later, he comes back and takes me back to the cell. And he uncuffs me. And when I walk into my cell, one step, I was just overwhelmed with this feeling of something evil has just happened in this place. This is not the same cell as when I left. Something has happened here, and I felt God, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, telling me, you need to guard yourself and cleanse this cell. Something has happened here, and I didn't know what, but I felt it. He left. The cell is dark. There's nothing in it but a bed, a mattress, a blanket, a pillow, and me. I don't have any. Oh, there's a Bible too. That's it. But I began to search my cell, inch by inch, very carefully, very meticulous. And I get to my pillow, and I feel this hard, like a marble, inside my pillow. It wasn't in the pillowcase, it was inside the pillow. And it hadn't been there before. I'd been there for 33 days. Same pillow. So I hadn't felt it before. So I took the pillow out of the pillowcase, and I found a small little cut on the inseam of the pillow. I didn't want to destroy it, because if you destroy government property, they punish you. So I couldn't open up and tear open the pillow. So I began to try to force that hard object out of the cotton, stuffing to that little cut. Eventually, I find that there is a bindle of crystal methamphetamine that was in my pillow. It wasn't there before, but it was there now. And I've been a dope cop a long time. I was a drug dealer, to say, even though I was not a real drug dealer, but I was a drug dealer. I'd seen drugs millions of times. What I saw was no mistaking. This was methamphetamine. So I'm devastated. This cop had just put drugs in my pillow. So if I report him, I'm going to be targeted not only by the inmates, but now by the guards, because you can't go, snitch on them. You just can't. You won't make it. But if I don't do something about it and they find it, I'm going to have 5 years added to my sentence. I didn't know what to do. I was angry, I was broken, I was confused. I didn't know what to do. For my entire career, the devil had left me alone. I wasn't a threat to the devil. I was on the devil's team. I was doing things that were evil and criminal and against God's teachings. So the devil left me alone. I never even had any stress. The devil left me alone. God was not a priority. But now my life had changed. I had become a different man. God had renewed my spirit, saved me from my own self, and I saw God in a different way. And that threatened the devil. So I feel that the devil used this officer, this situation, to break me. See, the devil, the Bible is very clear. The devil travels from here to there, roaming to kill and destroy. To destroy your spirit, to destroy your family, your marriage, your children. And for me, my faith was the weakest thing. I was a new believer for real this time. And my faith was growing every single day, but was still kind of not fully, formed yet. And the devil was hoping and trying and motivated to destroy me, my spirit, my faith most of all. 5 more years in prison would have done it. It would have broken me. I would have completely rejected God, and I would have aligned myself with the evilness that is in prison. I would have probably aligned myself with a group, a prison group, and began to do things. I had a lot of experience being a hustler. Making money and knowing how to move product without being caught, and how to talk to gangsters and drug dealers. So that was what I was good at. And I believe in my heart that the devil was trying to get me to abandon this new belief, this new thought that I had, to get me to go back in that way. Because if I did it, I wouldn't recover. I was not going to survive. 5 more years in prison might have actually caused my wife to, this is too much. Because she stood by me the entire time. She never relented. She never gave me one single feeling of, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to be with you. I'm not going to support you. She always was right there by my side, loving me and supporting me and praying for me. And so, but 5 more years, not very many women, wives, would want to stand by a man for 10 years in prison. So I believe that the devil was using this scenario to break me and to destroy me. So I get my toothbrush and I begin to grind this methamphetamine down to a really fine powder. Because if you flush a bundle of methamphetamine, they can always get it. The plumbing system in solitary confinement is always captured by the guards. There is a system where it captures anything that doesn't go through the little, what's it called? The mesh. So if I flushed this bindle, they would find it. And they knew it came from my cell. So I had to figure out what to do with it. So I decided to just grind it down to a fine powder, and I flushed half down the toilet, and the other half I washed down the sink drain. Then I sat on my bed, just completely deflated. I knew this was a battle that was bigger than me. This was a battle that was beyond what I could comprehend. I could understand guys attacking me and fighting me. I understood that. I understood that I was an ex-cop who did what I did. Guys are upset. They want to make a name for themselves and take out the enemy. I was the enemy. I understood that. I didn't understand the cops doing that to me. What were they going to gain from that? I'm already in prison. I'm already in solitary. There's nothing worse than solitary. I'm already at the bottom of the barrel. But it happened. So I began to see that this was something that was way beyond my understanding. And I was just deflated. And I sat on my bed on bunk. And I began to just get down on myself. And I began to ask myself, is this what I'm facing? Am I always going to be seen as a dirty criminal? As a guy who is just full of this baggage that will never, ever, ever escape me? Am I always going to have to be looking over my shoulder? Wherever I go, am I always going to be a target? And then I remembered what my dad told me months ago. God is going to use a storm to make you. And I remembered what God put in my spirit to be still and trust. So if those two things were true, then I shouldn't worry. But I was worried. Because they put drugs in my pillow. The lights go on automatically in solitary at 6 a.m. And at 6 a.m. exactly, my door smashes open and 6 guards come in with shields and masks and pepper spray and stuff. And I'm forced to the ground and shackled, my feet, my hands, and I'm drug out on my belly, and I'm laid down on the hallway outside of my cell. And 2 guards are guarding me, even though I'm shackled, and the other 4 guys are searching my cell. My face is sideways on the ground, my right cheek is on the floor, and I can see inside my cell. I see one of the guards cut open my pillow with his knife, or with a cutting instrument. And they began to carefully spread out all the cotton on the floor. It was all spread out on the floor. And they're going through every piece of cotton. It takes them about 15, 20 minutes. And then I see one of the guards get up, he's on his knees, and he walks down the corridor, and he speaks to the same guard that took me out that night. And they're talking and having a conversation. I can't hear what they're saying, but I saw them talking. And then he came back and ordered the other guys to put me back in my cell. And they left. I didn't have a pillow for a week. That was hard. But I knew what they had done. And they knew that I knew that, we knew. They knew. Because they didn't find it. And again, God had used another miracle. I wasn't facing another criminal charge. And so again, my faith, and I'm a roller coaster, up and down. Some days I have strong faith, some days I don't. It's just I'm a weak person who has a lot of trust issues. So I spent the next couple of months in solitary. That first 31 days that I was in, I wasn't allowed to call home, to call my wife, to write her a letter, to receive any letters. So she was devastated. She was afraid that her husband, who was an ex-cop, had been hurt, killed, something. She called the prison a dozen times, and they wouldn't tell her. I was in a prison in Northern California, about 7 hours from our home. And she called and begged and pleaded with him to explain to her what happened, where I was. She hadn't heard from me, and they wouldn't. So I was going through this personal storm in this solitary place, and she and my parents and my family were going through a completely separate storm, and just as bad as mine. Each one of us experiences things that sometimes no one else knows. I was the only one who knew what was going on with my life, in my personal struggle. I was the only one. And she was the only one going through her struggle because, no one asked. And it was difficult. My mom and her are real close, but she never told my mom things because she didn't want to scare my mom or frighten my mom or stress my mom. And so our kids never knew what I was going through. And even when I would tell her things, she just carried it herself. And so I began to see and understand that people are struggling, people are hurting, and we don't know. If you don't reach out, if you don't inquire, if you don't have that servant spirit to go and say, hey, brother, what's going on? And just listen, you'll never know. And that was me. I was a guy who hated people. I shouldn't say the word hate, but I didn't like people. For 20 plus years, I had only been dealing with the worst of the worst. I never was ever called to a home that was a happy home, for a good, nice meal. I was always called for tragedy, for tragic situations, for violence, for sexual stuff, immorality. And so that is all that I knew. And so my faith in people had really been hit severely, and I didn't like people. I didn't know how to reach out to people. And when they did, I cut it short real quick. I'm a guy who doesn't like to be touched. I don't like hugging people. I don't like, doing that. I'm sorry, I didn't like. I never, and Brian will tell you, when I first met him, he's a hugger. And I'm not. And so he was constantly trying to hug me, and I would just like get his hand and, do that whole, I wasn't that kind of a guy. But being alone in this place began to soften my heart and caused me to really miss that human interaction. It was a long process. Even after spending, even 3 years in prison, at the end I was still, he hugged me because he tricked me. But even at the end I was still like, that wasn't me. So after 96 days in solitary confinement, I was again awakened at 4 a.m. by these two officers, and they take me out of my cell, and they give me $40 in cash and a plane ticket. And they're telling me that I'm being released, and that I have to self-surrender in this place called Florence, Colorado. And no way, I didn't believe them at all. No, this is not true, this is not real. There is no way. I had never heard of an inmate who's in a federal prison being released on his own from solitary. Mind you, I'm wearing prison sweatpants, gray sweatpants, top and bottom, and a prison ID, and $40 in cash, and a plane ticket from Reno, Nevada to Florence, Colorado. And my plane leaves, I gotta be there tomorrow. And they tell me, go outside, there's a payphone, call for a taxi. In no way, I didn't believe it. I wouldn't go. They're setting me up to be killed. Or they're setting me up to be captured by the U.S. Marshals as an escaped prisoner, and I'm going to face 10 more years in prison. I wouldn't go. The administrative boss who was there, the captain, came out and said, you have to go. Here are the orders. You got to show up tomorrow in Florence, and you got to go. So I sat outside on that concrete bench by the payphone, waiting for the taxi to come. And I sat there just like, I'm going to die today. They're killing me. This is the way they're going to take me out. I didn't believe it. And then I remembered again. Be still and trust my plan. I am more than you think I am. Okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe that you're in control. So I sat there on that concrete bench, waiting for the taxi to show up. And he takes me to the airport in Reno. And I think I paid him like $15 for that taxi ride, so I had like $5 left. Bought me a hamburger from McDonald's. Last night, Glenn fed me a beautiful, big New York steak, but that burger was way better. Because I had a hamburger from McDonald's. And so I sat there in my gray sweats, well over 12 hours, on that chair in my departure gate, with nothing to read, no cell phone, just sitting there thinking. And I saw this woman that was on her phone. She was on Facebook or something. So I approached her and I said, hey, ma'am, I just got out of prison. I'm a good guy. Can I borrow your phone? And she got up and took off. Mind you, I've been in solitary for 96 days. Hadn't shaved. No shampoo. No soap. No deodorant. So you can imagine, I would fit right in Frisco, right in California. That's how I looked, you know, my scruffy beard and my long hair, and I'm sure I stunk, I don't know. So this woman walks away from me, and I felt like, man, I'm just a loser. I mean, this is horrible. I'm a good guy. God has changed my life. But she wouldn't even speak to me. So I sat back down, and I'm trying to figure out how to call my wife and tell her, hey, I'm going to this place in Colorado. I got released. I see another woman on the phone, and I go to her, and I'm real humble and real meek, and I tell her, can I borrow your phone to call my wife? I promise I'll stand right here by you, I won't leave. And she gave me her phone, and she stood like 2 inches from me. And she was a nice built woman. Could probably take me out. And so I called Courtney and we're on the phone and we're crying, and then she can't understand how this is happening. You're being sent where? And you're being released, and where you been? And what's going on? So this woman was very, very gracious and she heard my conversation. She got teary-eyed. I remember she got teary-eyed and emotional, and she was good. And so I go back to my seat, and I'm sitting there waiting for my plane who flies out that night. And I began to just remember what I had read in the Bible, what God had spoke to me these last 96 days. I remember God's promises. God had promised to protect me. God has promised to protect you. It's in the Bible. Amen. God has promised to never leave or forsake you. Amen. God has promised to help you overcome temptation. God has promised to give you wisdom and to give you eternal life. And I sat there remembering God's promises. And I sat there remembering what God had done in the Bible. God could use me. Maybe I could be used. I mean, I was a broken guy. I had a lot of baggage, but maybe I could be used. I mean, God doesn't want you to be perfect. God doesn't need you to be perfect. God needs you and wants you to be willing. That's it. Amen. If you're willing, God will do the rest. If you're able to say, God, I trust you and I'm willing. Lead me and I'll follow. Show me and I'll go. And that was me. I had nothing. I didn't have a cent on me. I stunk like a homeless guy. But I told God, I'm willing. I'm willing. Show me, light up my steps, and I'll go. And I remember God uses the insecure. I remembered Moses. Moses stuttered. Moses was intimidated to go speak to Pharaoh. He didn't want to do it. He didn't think that he had the ability to convince the king to release the Israelites. He was insecure. But God uses the insecure. And God will do the rest. God uses the overlooked. David was overlooked by his own family, his father and his brothers. When the prophet is trying to find and identify the king, everybody overlooked David. He's just a shepherd boy out there with the sheep. He's a young boy. He's nobody. But God saw him as a king. Goliath saw David as a dog. He called him a dog before that battle. But God saw David as a warrior. And so I began to understand that God sees us in a way that we don't see ourselves or that our own peers don't see us. So I began to think, man, I'm a convict. I'm a felon. I'm a guy who has broken every rule in the book. Literally, every rule in the book, I broke it. But if God could part the Red Sea for Moses, if that was true, and if God could stop the sun for Joshua, and if God could raise Lazarus from the dead, and if God could open prison doors for Peter, God can take care of me in this place. God can use me to talk about His miracles, to talk about redemption, to talk about what He's done for me personally. So I decided then, I was not going to let anybody define who I was. I was not going to let them see me or call me or treat me as a convict, as a criminal, as a loser, as whatever adjective they wanted to throw at me. Go ahead. I got thick skin. I can take it. I was not going to let that define me, though. I was going to let God define me. And maybe I was those things. And you know what? That's okay. God can use a person like me to change somebody's heart. And I began to believe that. And once I believed that, then everything else was cake after that. I mean, I believed that God was going to change my life. Not just my life, though. God was not going to use this storm, this trial, to just remake and reshape me. God was going to use this to shape my wife and her faith in God and her future commitment and service to God's kingdom, and my family and my children. All these things began to really resonate within me. And so I show up to Florence, Colorado the next day, and they put me in solitary again for about a week before they released me to the camp. And then I walk into this camp, and I'm a different guy. I'm still being harassed and attacked. I mean, being a cop in prison is not easy. There's always a target on your back, no matter what. There's always somebody plotting on ways to come get you and come at you, because there's a notch on their belt. There's a badge from attacking a cop. I had seen other cops attacked. Beside me, there was 2 other police officers from different states that were in Colorado, and I'd seen both of those guys hurt and attacked by inmates. So when it happened to me again, I expected it, but I was ready this time. Anyway, God began to use me in that place. I had this simple job as a custodian, janitor. I cleaned toilets. We all have to have a job in federal prison. And my job was to be a bathroom toilet cleaner. That's okay. That's what I did my first couple of weeks there. And then one of the administrators hired me to be a towel driver. So now I'm able to drive other inmates around when they're being released from prison. That didn't last very long, because I got called in one day, and the same captain who gave me the job tells me, "You can't be a driver. You have a DUI on your record." And I said, "No, I don't." "Yes, you do. Look." Well, the FBI, within the last year of me being in prison, added a driving under the influence to my criminal record so that I wouldn't be able to get a license. And I thought to myself, I've been a cop a long time. I've never been stopped by the police, or I have, but never been charged or ticketed or anything. The devil's working again. The devil's trying to break me again. But I lose that job. Okay, I'm back to being a janitor again. That's who I am. I'll spend the next 3 years here in prison cleaning toilets, and you know what? That's okay. And then one day, an officer asked me to come give a speech at the ADX, where the real bad guys are. So I go to this GED graduation. There are inmates in cages. Each one is in an individual cage, and I'm brought in there, and I'm there to give a speech about. I have talked to my wife by email and my brother, who's a high school counselor, and I asked him, what can I say to these hardened criminals that are getting their GEDs, but they're never going to be released. They're going to die in prison. What can I say to them? I've been asked to give this speech. And so she gives me a lot of good advice. My brother gives me some good advice. And I give this speech. And I implement God into all of it. And my family and our upbringing and redemption and all kinds of stuff. I give my speech and I leave. I go back to my routine in prison. Unbeknownst to me, the main warden from the ADX is in the audience, listening to what I have to say. And so I get called in by the COs at the camp, and they said, hey, the ADX warden wants to see you. For what? But I go, I don't have a choice. And he says, man, you blew my mind yesterday. So I'm going to offer you this job as the education coordinator at the camp. And so they gave me an office with a door, a big old giant TV. You guys were there. A sofa, a desk, a computer. And I was now the guy in charge of inmates programming. So I began to see my life changing. This is another Joseph story. I was thrown into prison by men who wanted me destroyed. The FBI wanted my life destroyed because of my own arrogance. It was my own cockiness, because here I am. I'm the only guy in our unit that's undercover. I'm the Hispanic that's able to speak with drug dealers and Mexican drug dealers. And so I'm the guy getting all the pats on the back. I'm the guy that, the brass is coming in and shaking my hand, and man, Diaz, you are killing it, man. All this money. And then now the movie's out there, and of course there I am again, so I'm feeling like, I'm a Hollywood guy. And so the arrogance, the cockiness that I had within myself amplified the FBI's desire to break me and destroy me. And so here, I'm a guy in prison now who the top boss of the ADX is seeing me in a different aspect. He's giving me a job that, man, I'm going to have an office, a closed door. I can remove myself from all the prison politics. And even though I'm an ex-cop who everybody hates, every inmate is required to program in prison. So now they all have to come see me to get classes, and I'm in charge. And so I began to feel like, my story is similar to Joseph's. Not to his extent or his caliber, but it's similar. I am being used in ways that I didn't expect. And then I'm given a job as the camp photographer, so now I'm going to visit all the families every weekend. Brian had visits every weekend. And God bless him, because a lot of us didn't. But I was there talking to Lee, and talking to Glenn's family, and talking to Juan's family, and every weekend. I'm out of the prison environment for just a few hours. So again, that was God. And so I'm almost out. I have a year and a half or so left in my sentence. I'm enjoying my job. Things are good. A particular group of inmates had really targeted me really bad. And it was my own people, but there's a different sect of prison inmates that belong to this group, and they were really targeting me. I had been in 11 different fights, and every one involved people from this group. One day, my brother Danny and David, who are the two guys that are in the movie, and mind, just so you guys know, back in high school, we won the state championship, and then we were pretty good. The movie exaggerates. Danny, you saw him. He's built like me. He wasn't as fast as me, but he was a good runner. He could still run a 4:30 mile, as a sophomore in high school. So he was good, but the media made him out to be a chubby guy who was not that good. But Danny and David were speaking about our life in Texas. They went to this school where migrant kids primarily go to, and the parents were there. And Danny and David spoke about what had happened in our lives. And afterward, they signed autographs and met people and took pictures. Well, it's amazing how God works. Because in Texas, Danny and David took pictures with the little sister of the prison shot caller for Texas. And so this prison shot caller, who was a bad dude, but he was a respected dude, his mom sent in pictures to him. Hey, look, little Evelyn and us, we met this guy named Danny Diaz and David Diaz, and they were so gracious, and they talked to us for 20 minutes, took pictures, they gave us shirts, and what, Danny Diaz? So he came to where I lived, and he said, hey, are these your brothers? And I said, yeah, it's Danny and David. He hugged me, and he said, you are living with us now. And so he took me from where I was, constantly being harassed, my property stolen, being jumped by guys, to now I belonged to the Texas prison group gang. And I lived with them, I ate with them, I hung out with them, I worked out with them. And so the last year and a half of my prison sentence, man, was beautiful. I mean, the food was horrible, but I was not having to, for the previous 2 years, I hadn't been able to go to the bathroom on my own. I had to have someone to go with me. And going to the bathroom with another person is disgusting. But you're in the bathroom or in the shower, and you have to have somebody guarding the entrance because you have to be ready. And so for 2.5 years, that was my life. Q, you guys know Q. Q went with me every single time to the shower, to the bathroom, and he was all tatted down, tattoos on his head, bald head, and all over his arms. But he took care of me because the shot caller from Texas had ordered this to happen. Anyway, so my last year and a half were not too bad. One day I'm in my office, and there is a female counselor that works at the camp. She was a teacher, and she came into my office early in the morning, and she said, hey, I had an accident on my way to work. I hit a deer. My car is dented. There's blood on it. There's guts from the animal that I hit. Can you please help me go clean it up? Fix it as best you can. I don't want the inmates to be gossiping and talking or be distracted about what I did. I didn't even think about it twice. I didn't think that it was wrong. I didn't think that I was breaking the law. It just didn't dawn on me. I was willing to help because she asked me to help. She's a staff member. I'm an inmate, but she gave me her car keys. I walked out of the prison to the CO parking lot in my prison uniform, not even thinking that I was committing any violations. I go to her car, I clean it up, I go and I get some landscaping paper from the landscaping department and some duct tape, and I tape the broken fender. I think you saw it, right, Brian? And it took me about an hour or so, and I cleaned it all up. Unbeknownst to me, they're watching in the camera. And they see me going into her car, unlocking it, sitting in her driver's seat, bending over to get the latch for the hood. And that was me. I did it because she asked me to. Never thought that it would come back to haunt me. So I go back to my office. The rest of the day is routine. That night, I'm handcuffed again and taken to the ADX. And I'm told that they want to talk to me, but there's a unit, I forget what it's called, but it's similar to the internal affairs. The officers that investigate officers and misconduct. And there's a lieutenant in there that is speaking with me, and he's telling me, this is on a Wednesday before Father's Day in June. And he tells me, you have an opportunity to go home by Father's Day. I need you. We saw you. We saw you with her car keys. We saw you in and out of her car. So we know that you have this intimate connection to her. Why else would she give you her car keys that have her home keys on it? You're in her car, has her registration. You know where she lives now. You know what her full name is, which I didn't. I never bothered to go into her personal. I went and unlocked it and did the hatch, or the latch, and that was it. But he says, we have you. We got you. We need you to say and to report that you had and that you've been having and you had an ongoing sexual relationship with her, that you had this, and this done to you, sex acts. And I'm thinking, what? This never happened. And he says, I don't care if it's true or not. We want to get rid of her. She's a bad apple. She's a bad employee. We want her fired. And maybe even charged. Because as an inmate, you don't have the freedom. You can't consent to having relations with another person, especially a staff member. So you're the victim. He kept saying, you're the victim. Man, you're good. You're going to be a victim. You're going to be taken care of. And you're going to be released. You're going to be home a year and a half early. Man, your family's they're waiting for you. Don't you want to go home? And I sat there thinking, and I was just, what? And I said, it never happened. We don't care. And he says, now you have morals? Now you have morals? You didn't have morals before. You were a crook. And I said, Lieutenant, I can't do that. I can't lie and accuse her and destroy her life, destroy her reputation, devastate her freedom and her family over a lie? I'm not doing it. And he says, yes, you are. We have you. You broke this rule, this law. You're doing it. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. But as a reward, we're going to release you. And you're going to go home. And I said, you know what? Charge me. I'm not going home. I'm not going to go home. I'm not going to allow this lie to destroy her life. I've destroyed enough people's lives. I'm done. I'm not doing it. I'll serve more time. And so he cuffs me, and I get returned back to the camp. The next morning, I get to my job, my office, and my boss walks in, and he says, come to my office. So I go in there, and he says, what is wrong with you? You're getting a chance to go home. What the heck is wrong with you? All you got to say is, that she did this or this happened. You don't even have to get that graphic. Just say something, and you'll go home. And he says, they can't believe you're being that stupid. Because every other inmate here that we ask will do it. But you're the guy they want to use because they have you on film. So there's proof. And I'm saying, no, I can't do it. Fire me if you have to. Give me more time if you have to. But I can't go home and face my wife and my kids. Can't do it. How do I tell her that, hey, I'm free, I'm home early because I had relations with another woman? No. Can't do it. So that is that. But I began to really feel like the devil wasn't done. He wasn't quitting on me. He was still trying to get me, trying to destroy my marriage, my future, whatever God is going to use me for. The devil is trying to inject that doubt, that fear. And I didn't do it. So I go to my computer and I type up a long report, 7 or 8 pages, and I go to a friend that I trust in prison, and I ask him to mail that report to his wife so she can mail it to my wife so she can have, in case something happens. That way the attorneys could at least have a true copy of what happened. I didn't trust the FBI. I wasn't part of this. The FBI had gone to see me 2 times already in prison, trying to get me to align with them to go after these cartel groups. But if you know anything about how that works, anybody who goes against cartels doesn't make it. And I was a guy who was all over the media. I couldn't hide who I was. The media had been to my house, my kids' school. They went to Courtney's house, Courtney's work. So I couldn't hide. I couldn't go anywhere and hide. I was not going to go against these groups that are, they're terrorist groups. The FBI threatened, they manipulated, I couldn't do it. So I didn't put it past them that they were not still involved in this scenario. But I didn't do it. Later on, I spoke with Miss Stone, that was her name, and I told her what had happened. She was broken. She was devastated that her own department, her own job would come after her that way. She didn't tell me why. I never asked her why. I didn't know her very well. She wasn't my counselor. The only interaction I ever had with her was that in the office, in my office. So it wasn't like we had a history. She was a counselor for Joe or for Glenn and for Brian, but she wasn't mine, so I didn't know her. So I could have easily accused her because I didn't know her, but I just couldn't do that. And so I told her what happened, and that was it. Never spoke to her again. I found out later on that she was gone from the prison. Don't know for what reason. I don't want to speculate. But it was after I left. what I have learned from my experience, that is, it's just so profound to me, is we are in a war. We are in a war, guys, that is so explicit. And it's not a war against this group or that group, these guys or that guys. It is a 100% war that is attacking us, orchestrated by the devil. 100%. I see it now everywhere I go. I see what's going on in America today. I won't go into politics, but I see what's going on in our country and the drastic change we've had just in the last 4 to 6 years. The confusion that is rampart in our communities and our kids. We are very, 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 very open with our kids, and we talk to them openly about the teachings of God and what the schools and what the states and what the government is doing. And so the war is not just individual. We do have individual wars, but it's an overall war against demonic oppression from the devil. And I have learned through my experience that God sometimes will use a man who has had a beautiful, perfect life. And that person, that man or woman will do fantastic, great things for God. And God can use the dirtiest, ugliest guy with the most baggage to do great and awesome things for God too. It doesn't matter. We all have a story. I'm a guy who is scarred. I have scars. Physical, emotional, psychological. Scars from things that have happened in my life that I used to be ashamed of. I was embarrassed. My wife is such a clean-cut, awesome person. To get her to even exaggerate doesn't happen. And I'm the opposite. I'm the guy who, I'm the lowest of the low, right? I'm just that guy. But God can use a guy like me. I'm a guy who has a lot of baggage. And I used to be embarrassed about that. I used to be embarrassed about going to places because everybody knows who I am. In my community, in my city, I was all over the media. And then, if you guys don't know, Hulu, in the last 6 months, Hulu made a huge documentary about my city. The show is called Killing Fields because Kern County, Bakersfield, where I worked, has the highest percentage of police shootings. We kill more people in Bakersfield than New York and Chicago by police. So we have the most, for 4 years in a row, the highest officer-involved shootings because in Bakersfield, the departments, they promote that. Shoot them. It's easier to shoot them and kill them than to have to defend yourself or a lawsuit. So a lot of us have been in multiple officer-involved shootings and we were all clean. Whether you were or not, they made it clean. And I have had some of those situations happen. So Hulu made this documentary and I was their star witness. I didn't name any names, but I talked a lot about my life growing up as a young cop and what I went through and the things that I did. So my face and my name, I have a hard name, but once you hear it, Damacio, you won't forget it. It's a very unique name. So everybody knew who I was. And so I was embarrassed. There were times when we'd go somewhere and I wouldn't go in until she went in and got us a table. Then I'd come in because I didn't want to go and walk through the aisles of a restaurant and have this guy look at me or this guy or this lady and say something. I got called names and you guys don't, just walking around, going to the bank, people would call me names. People were sending her emails or text messages or on Facebook and just really maligning her. So I was embarrassed and I was ashamed of the scars that I had, the baggage that I carried. And then one day, I began to see, scars are not that bad. Scars can be a good thing. Scars, they show who you are. They talk about where you've been, where you come from. And you can either be scarred for life, they can be a stain on your character and who you are, or with God, you can use that scar and have a testimony, have a story. And so I believe, I am no preacher. I'm not a guy that wants to be up here preaching the gospel. That's not who I am. But I sure am not afraid anymore. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, yep, I'm that guy. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you should be afraid of me. I'm that guy. I would do whatever it took to accomplish this goal. And so those scars have in the last couple of years that I've been home, God has used them for His glory. I talk about God and what He has done in my life, in our marriage, in my children's. I have 3 kids. You won't believe this. My son is 15 and he's 6'4". Don't know how that happened, but anyway, he's a 4.7 GPA student. My son Chris has never had a B in his life. Jennifer was a student of the year at her school. Our kids have overcome having a father who was a prisoner convict and have done well. Not because of me. Mainly because of God and her. And I'm proud to say that. I'm proud of my kids. I'm proud to say that my kids have overcome. And so God has a story to tell through me. God has a story. Everybody here has a story. It may not be as crazy and graphic as mine, but there's somebody that you know, your neighbor, your grandson, your daughter, that needs to hear your testimony, because your testimony might be exactly what they need to get through that day. I have learned in the last 2 years that people are hurting in ways that you don't see. People have called me and called Courtney and have told me, tonight is my last meal. I'm going to die tonight. I'm going to kill myself today because of this situation or that situation. And so we talk about what God did through me and my life and our family, and it gives them a little bit of hope. And then it gives them the opportunity to, you know what? Maybe God is real. Maybe if I turn to God, maybe that can help me. And so my point to you is that your story doesn't have to be as ugly as mine. But somebody needs to hear it. There's a testimony in every one of us. Don't care how young you are, how old you are. Tell your story, because somebody needs to hear it. And so with that, I want to thank you guys for having me here. I've had a fantastic weekend. I've gained like 5 pounds. You guys really know how to eat over here. And so I'm very grateful and gracious to you guys for the invite, Pastor, your family, your wife. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys. And that's it. God bless you.
Thank you. Hey, we're just going to say a prayer, do a last song, and you all are dismissed. And I want you to know that the funny thing is when you talked about Miss Stone, if there's any question about it, I saw the whole thing. So that was an incredible ordeal. It was very distressing to see those things happen, because when you're a patriot, you feel but I saw God move, and God took care of things. Isn't that great that God will redeem people? And Diaz is out, Joe is out, Glenn's out, I'm out. So that's so wonderful. So let's say a prayer, and then we're going to sing one last song so we can leave incredibly encouraged. Okay? Lord Jesus, thank you again. Thank you again. I thank you for Diaz and his entire family. I thank you that you don't forget us. I thank you that you don't forget the prisoners that are there and that you're available to them. I thank you, Lord Jesus, that those of us here that are locked inside of our own prison, they're just not prison walls, but they're prison of addiction, or they're prison of hurt or pain or suffering or something that's going on, that you are not forgetting them either, that you will deliver them, you will help them, you'll be with them. You love all of us. I know this. Thank you, Lord Jesus. We praise your name. We give you all the glory and the honor forever and ever. Amen.